Welcome to the Survivor to Thriver show with your happiness expert, Samia Bano. Do you feel stuck, silent, and stressed? Is something hurting your heart and soul? Are you burning yourself out? If so, you are in the right place because this is the podcast people from all over the world join in to learn exactly how to stop suffering and start living with inner peace and joy. Let's get started. Hey, we have been talking about forgiveness-related challenges. More specifically, the challenges we can sometimes face in forgiving ourselves. Look, sometimes it happens. We take action, we make decisions that we know are not the right thing to do. Decisions that we know are not in alignment with our values and our principles. But we take those decisions anyway. We engage in those actions anyway. We may do it because maybe we are too afraid to do the right thing. We may do what we know is not right because maybe we just don't care, in the sense that, we rationally understand that what I'm doing is going to hurt someone else. But we are not compassionately and empathetically connected to the others around us, those who are going to be impacted by our actions. And so we don't care that what we do will hurt them. We only care that, I'm going to get the result that I desire. When we do wrong in this kind of knowing way, there is very just cause, just reason, if at a later time you find yourself recognizing your mistake, feeling bad about it, wanting to take corrective action, taking corrective action, in other words, going through the forgiveness process. Yes, there is an element of you needing to forgive yourself in this kind of a situation, right? Because there was a part of you that knew there was something very wrong with what you were doing, and you chose to do it anyway. And it's important that when we make a mistake, when we do something that we know is wrong, that we have the courage, the honesty, the integrity to face up to it, to face up to our own selves. We all have that, that little angel and that little devil within us. And sometimes one is dominant and sometimes the other. And it's important for us that we accept both sides of ourselves. That we acknowledge that, yes, I have the capacity for both good and evil, for both right and wrong. And if I don't want to be doing wrong, if I want to lead a life where my decisions are being made by my angelic side, so to speak, where my decisions are based on my morals, my ethics, my values, my principles. Well, look, then we have to be willing to accept when we make a mistake or when we do something wrong. Right? Because we are human. It's human to make mistakes. It's human to be tempted. It's human to every so often give in to those temptations, right? So it's a very unrealistic expectation if we expect ourselves to always do the right thing, always make the right decision, to always do what is courageous, to always do what is compassionate and empathetic. It's an unrealistic expectation. We will all, on occasion, slip up. We will all, on occasion, make mistakes. We will all, on occasion, allow our fears to dominate and guide our actions rather than our conscience, for example. So in those circumstances, absolutely go through the forgiveness process. Go through the forgiveness process. And when we go through the forgiveness process, we can come back to a place of peace. We can come back to a place of feeling in integrity with ourselves. But there are other times when we find ourselves blaming ourselves, judging ourselves, and that blame and judgment is in fact unwarranted. And that blame and judgment is based on inaccurate, faulty reasoning. Our analysis of the problem is incorrect. It's like whatever the circumstances that leads us to blame and judge ourselves, and the reasons that we give ourselves for why we're blaming and judging ourselves, why we deserve that blame and judgment, that negative judgment, they're based on faulty reasoning. At least faulty to the extent that oftentimes that reasoning is reflective of our having taken a very narrow perspective on the situation. Or faulty in the sense that it's a perspective that is not grounded in self-empathy, that is not grounded in self-compassion. It may be faulty, that reasoning may be faulty insofar as it has failed to take into account the big picture of like what was going on with us, the big picture perspective, the big picture context within which we made the decisions that we made. And when we have an incorrect analysis of the problem, I mean, come on, how can you come up with an effective solution? We can't. And so it's like we have an incorrect analysis of the problem, so we cannot come up with an effective solution. And that is why we find ourselves struggling to forgive ourselves. Or we can find ourselves in such situations struggling to forgive ourselves, right? Because the forgiveness is a part of the solution. But if you don't have a proper understanding of the problem, we cannot implement an effective solution. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Now, of course, in my own life, the most glaring example of this kind of mistake, of my having made this kind of mistake, was when I subjected myself to blame and judgment and shame and guilt in the aftermath of surviving child sexual abuse. And I was very convincing to myself. The reasons that I gave for why I blamed myself and why I deserved that shame, why I deserved that guilt, it was very convincing to myself. I would say things like, well, of course, it was my fault what happened, because I was too weak and pathetic. Too weak and pathetic to do anything to protect myself. Like, why didn't I run away? Why didn't I fight against that person? Why didn't I scream and shout? Why didn't I go tell somebody about what was happening? No, I just lay there like a stick. So of course it's my fault that it happened. That was just one of the many reasons because of which I blamed and judged myself. There were others. I won't get into it. Okay? I won't get into those because, well, I can really go off on this, right? But let's stick to the point at hand. As blaming and judging myself, I was thoroughly convinced of my deserving that blame and judgment. But what was the problem? Why was this this thinking inaccurate? Why was that blame and judgment unwarranted? Because yes, it was true that in the moment I failed to take any action to protect myself in terms of fighting back or running away or screaming, shouting, things like that. It's true. That's just what happened. But it's also true that I did the very best I could in that moment with what I knew and what I had to help me get through that trauma, to help me survive through that trauma. I did the very best that I could. And the best just turned out to be, in my case, to lay still. Lay still and wait for that time to end. But because it was the best I could do, it's like, where is there the need for blame? If that truly was the best that I could do, and it was, why am I blaming myself? Why am I judging myself? Where is the need to blame and judge? If I take on a perspective of empathy and compassion, you see, I can see so clearly what happened was not my fault. I didn't invite that abuse. I didn't want that abuse. Okay? It's like, I remember this was, I don't know, maybe like some 10 years ago or something. And at that point in time, I had started to open up to people about my being a survivor. But at that point in time, my family still didn't know. And I was still really, really scared and concerned about my family finding out. So the people that I was sharing with, I was being very, very conservative in terms of who I shared with and when I shared with and why. So it was only when I felt like, okay, I need to do this because I need to get some help, I need to get some support. And I can and I felt confident that my sharing in that moment will maintain my confidentiality, that, whatever I'm sharing with this person I'm choosing to share with, that it will not go back to my family, because that was a huge fear I had, because I was afraid they wouldn't believe me, or even if they believed me, they would blame and judge me, because I had been blaming and judging myself, even knowing all the facts of the situation. I blamed and judged myself, right? So it wasn't an unreasonable assumption on my part that even if my family believes me about what happened, that they might still blame and judge me. And I didn't think I could take that. So for me, it was very important to maintain confidentiality. I remember on this particular occasion, I decided to come out and share with this girl, and she was just someone that I had met on campus. I was still in college at that point in time, and I'd actually found out that she was a survivor herself, and she had been doing a lot of good work with some organizations around town that work with survivors of sexual abuse, sexual trauma, that kind of thing. And so, I had a lot of hope that, she would be able to help me and support me. And I remember, I told her what I needed to tell her, and at some point, it might even have been some of the very first few words that she said. If they weren't the first few words, honestly, I can't remember what she said before she said this, but she said something to the effect of, "Samia, you were just a child. What happened was not your fault. It couldn't be your fault. You were just a child. What could you have, even done to deserve this or to provoke it? It's not your fault what happened, and it can't be your fault. You were just a child." And I heard her say that in that moment, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks, because I had spent so many years of my life blaming and judging myself, and here was this person who was like, "It couldn't even be your fault. You were just a child. There's nothing you could have done to deserve or provoke that kind of abuse. You were just a child." And I tell you, I never, I was like, oh my God. And it's like, you see, now, even I see the truth of that statement. I see the truth of that statement. It's like, it's so true. There's no excuse and never an invitation to abuse. But even so, when we're thinking in the context of adults, we still manage to find all kinds of excuses and blame and judge each other and ourselves. But really, if you think about it in the context of a child being abused by an adult, it should be really, really easy for us, shouldn't it? To see the truth of this idea that there is absolutely no excuse for abuse. And certainly never an invitation. And yet, when I was in that situation, when I was the one who had experienced that abuse, I found so many different reasons to blame myself, to judge myself. And then I felt ashamed, I felt guilty. It was like this huge hurdle in my way of healing. It was this huge hurdle in my way of being able to experience the very inner peace that I was so desperate for. This blame, this judgment, this shame, this guilt, this not being able to forgive myself. And why wasn't I able to forgive myself? It's because my very understanding of the situation was faulty. Given that faulty understanding, the only logical consequence really was what I was experiencing. The logical consequence, given that faulty thinking, was blame, judgment, shame, guilt. And as long as that faulty reasoning lasted, I couldn't forgive myself, right? So sometimes when we find ourselves so challenged to forgive ourselves, we really have to kind of check in, take a second or more, and really check in. I would say go to your heart. Go to your heart and ask your heart, hey heart, what's the problem here? Was this really my fault? Is this really a situation or circumstance that warrants blame and judgment, shame and guilt? What's the real problem here? And what can I do about it? I know this can be an extremely, extremely difficult challenge. If you are in the midst of a situation where you're blaming and judging yourself, you may be just as convinced as I was in my reasoning that I deserve that blame, I deserve that negative judgment and shame and guilt. And it took outsiders talking to other people who are outside of my situation, who could see things from a bigger picture perspective, who could see things in a more objective fashion, to help me shift my own perspective, to help me correct my own perceptions and understandings, so that I could truly forgive myself. Forgive myself even for all that time I had spent judging myself and blaming myself. And forgive myself for not having acted in the way that I thought I should have acted, or that I thought I could have acted to help myself better, and prevent that abuse, or at least stop it much sooner than it did. Right? But it was forgiveness. But the forgiveness, it couldn't happen until I corrected my perspective. So, look, if this is something you find yourself struggling with, please do not continue to struggle with it on your own. Reach out for help and support. And I'm one person you can reach out to. And you know how to reach me. Just go to my website at www.academyofthriving.com. Click on the Contact Us page, and you'll see how you can connect with me. So until next time, I wish you lots of peace and joy.